Fans of 28mm sci-fi wargaming, futuristic battle tanks and homage designs to one-off scratch build models by Dave Andrews, thank you very much for joining me for a model and build review of the Lang Patton assault tank from Battlecastings. This one here. So this video is following on from my unboxing where we took a look at this interesting vehicle that has come out of the one-man band sci-fi garage company, as we could call them, Battlecastings. So over the last couple of weeks I've been working on the build, cleaning it up, getting it assembled, getting all the magnets in, and what I'm going to do in today's video is I'm going to show you the results. So what we're going to do is first I'm going to show you around the model. You know, here it is in front of us with its options laid out. We'll look at the details and its features and see a bit about how it works, so to speak. I'll then talk a bit about the build process and the quality of the kit and how I found that, any issues I encountered and any solutions that I devised. And then we'll do some size comparisons against a comparable hexagonal tank, shall we say. Then I'll finish by wrapping up with a few thoughts about what I think about this kit overall, the miniature, and if it's something that you may or may not be interested in. So that's the general plan. Before I start, this model was sent to me by John Lander from Battlecastings as a review copy, so I've not bought this. I'll approach this in the way I do all my model reviews. Where I see good stuff, I'll point that out and I'll say what I like. Where I've encountered issues and faults, I will draw your attention to those as well. But please do bear that in mind when appraising the opinions I offer in this video. Right, so without further ado, let's dive on in. As you can see, it's fully built. I've got some options laid out in front of it, so let's just quickly run over what you get and then we'll look around the vehicle and its weapon options. So we've got the actual tank itself here, which is a very interesting looking vehicle. We've got two different options for weapon sponsons. So we've got these, which I refer to as energy cannons, twin energy cannons or dual energy cannons perhaps. We've got these that are currently mounted on, which I've taken to calling a cyclonic gun array. There's two optional hull-mounted weapons, a piece of track, which I've not stuck on because of how I've built the tank, and we'll come back to that later. And then there's also a pintle weapon for the commander's cupola. So there you go. That is what comes in the kit. Let's take these away for a moment and have a look around the model. So, what is this tank? Well, this is, in broad terms of its design, this is a homage design to the Land Raider tank from the original Rogue Trader Warhammer 40,000. But it's been done in a way as to be from the same design lineage, but also unique and different as well. And I think in that regard, this kit has been very successful. It's got this really interesting rakish profile where you've got the six-sided hexagonal track design, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's got this sort of rakish lowered front end, so it's not like a more even shaped hexagon. It's a sort of unusual design, and I think that gives it some intriguing flavour compared to, say, other hexagonal tanks. So the vehicle is built up of a central hull section, the two large track units that completely encompass that central hull, the crew compartment and engine. Then we've got the side armour sections, or the side panels, which have got some storage bins. We've got some, I presume these are supposed to be headlight designs here. Got like some maintenance hatches perhaps, or access panels. A little bit of a cutout feature, and there is some detail in there. You might struggle to see it, but there is a bit of internal detail there. You can see the internal detail more clearly here. So there's a bit of an opportunity to paint that if you wish. We've got a side door, we've got some power cabling, we've got the mounting for the weapon sponson. One of the options are these triple mount smoke dischargers. I chose to put them here and here. It felt like a nice place to put them. You could put those in other parts of a tank. And then at the rear, we've got the power pack, the engine, and there's these two nice chunky exhausts. You can see how that attaches there. There's no underside detail to the tank. These holes here, these are just some test holes I was doing when I was working out how to fit the exhaust pipes. We'll come back to that. There's this transmission block and the final drive at the front. A viewport for the tank commander, or perhaps tank driver there. A cupola mounted heavy weapon. A commander's hatch, and this is just blue tacked on. you can see that it does have internal detail. So if you wanted to do it open, it's a nice little optional feature you've got there. We've then also got a secondary hatch detail here at the back. There's a mounting mast or a mounting point for an aerial if you want to put one on. Some rivets, a few other bits, some sort of grill, perhaps a cooling vent, the engine itself, and 2 exhaust pipes, which are separate. You can put those on in a number of different ways. We've also got 2 doors at the side, one on each side. Just take the side guns off, you can see that. And I've not stuck these in position yet, just to show that they have internal detail. Now the vehicle itself, and if we remove the other one, there we go, it doesn't actually have internal detail, but there is the internal cavity there. So if you wanted a bit of a modelling project to create an internally detailed version of this, and you've got the startings of it, and the fact that the doors open that way and have the detailing is quite nice. And it's certainly a feature that I rather liked about the tank. Right, let's put the sponsons and weapons back on. In terms of the sponsons and weapons themselves, there's 2 sets. The first of these, so these are hexa mounted weapons, so sets of 6, so perhaps sticking with the 6-sided hexagonal track unit. And these are fully magnetized. You can see they're double stacked, and they're quite nice actually. And I've drilled out the barrels and the muzzle brakes just to enhance the detail a little. And we have a winged skull marking device on the outside of the magazine. Quite an interesting layout there. The weapon sponsons, now I suppose when you look at this, they're quite wide. They're really quite wide, and you could think that they are somewhat goofy looking. So that's a bit of a personal taste thing as to what you think of them. They are what they are. What I will say though is the actual design of this sponson does allow the cyclonic gun array to fully articulate through 180 degrees. And if you're playing sci-fi futuristic games where the vehicle has such abilities, well, in this instance, you've actually got a realistic imagining of how such a weapon mount might actually have to look. And, you know, if you could imagine some vehicles from crazy techno majors in the far distant future, you know, this perhaps might be the sort of wacky weapons layout they might create. I quite like the cyclonic gun arrays, I have to admit. They are my preferred weapon option in terms of what is included in the kit. And talking of weapon options, we've then also got the energy cannon. These energy cannons are in this sort of stepped, back step design. You get, you know, one for each side. They're magnetized. The main weapons are magnetized, and those go on like that. So these are very chunky, hefty looking beam weapons. Perhaps they're particle beams, laser beams, we don't know. You could run right with your imagination there. I think these are quite goofy looking. They're even goofier looking than the cyclonic gun arrays. But, you know, and I wouldn't personally go with these. I'd either go with this or perhaps something which I'll come to later. But, you know, they are what they are, and they do have a certain kitsch type of feel to them, almost a bit Flash Gordon, I might say. And in that regard, if you like designs of that nature, then perhaps these are something for you. And you could also reverse the fitting, so you have a backstep design like that. So that's another option you've got there. And if you wanted to be really particular, you could cut the, I suppose you might call them part of the aiming equipment, but cut that off and put those on the other side. I've not drilled the barrels on these, they come pre-cast with a sink in them. Same with the smoke dischargers, they come with holes ready done, as is this heavy machine gun here, or heavy gyrojet projector, perhaps. So yes, you've got the energy cannon option as well. It's nice that in the kit you do get the option of the 2 different weapon systems, and I think between the energy cannons and the cyclonic gun arrays, there's 2 quite interesting and different styles of weapons on offer here. And, you know, I appreciate that. The cyclonic gun arrays are magnetized, just like the energy cannons, and they're magnetized in 2 places. They're magnetized on tops for the rotational mount and on the side for the elevation mount. And the magnets here are 6x3mm neodymium magnets. They came in the kit. They seem to be N35 grade, which are plenty strong. And I will say that the magnets are of a good strength for the weapons. There's a decent amount of resistance, and these things aren't going to flop off by accident, and they're going to hold in the position that you put them in. So that's a good bit of design. And I'm just thinking what else to say. I mean, the tracks come cast on the side units, so there's no building of the tracks to do, and they run all the way around. There is some detail within that, although there was quite a bit of difficult cleanup to do inside of there, so I'll come to that in a bit. Just thinking of the details. You can see these towing lugs here. Now these are cast with this hole filled in. You can just get it in focus, that's a bit better, you can see that now. So what I did is, before I stuck the hull sides on, I drilled those out so they're hollow, and that just, like drilling out the barrels of the Cyclone gun array, it just enhances the detail a little bit, and it's quite nice in that regard. So there you go, that's a tour around the Lang Pattern Assault tank. Let's now talk about the kit quality and the build process and how I found that side of the build. So before we start, let's talk about instructions first. The model is supplied with this instruction sheet and guidance, and there's a bit of general advice here. There's a good point here about the shims to remove on these door grabs. As it says here, wash the kit first. So yeah, you definitely want to wash the kit. There's a point here about the grab on the glue. In other words, and what we mean by that, by grab, is how quickly the super glue will stick this, and it can be very quick. This is a slightly different resin to what most people are used to using. So it's a non-VOC. VOC is volatile organic compound content. So it's like a no hydrocarbon resin. Super glue grabs really quickly on it, so test fit first when you're building it before you put the glue on, and make sure you put the glue in the right place and get the part in position quickly once you've connected it, because you could very easily find out with something stuck in the wrong spot. So that's an important point there about the super glue grab. And there's a general advice, make sure you get your magnet polarity right. Well, that goes without saying. So on the instructions, we get this exploded diagram, and it doesn't really give you any advice on how to build it. While this is a relatively simple kit in its design, we could have still had some instructions showing how to build it. The way I built it, so let me talk you through the process. I constructed the inner hull first, so this is 4 parts. So I built that first, and I made sure everything was nicely lined up and centered. And as I was building it, I was test fitting it on these 2 side pieces, the track unit. So I built that first. Once I'd built the center, I then stuck the 2 track sections onto that, and then I stuck the outer hull sections onto the track units, and then finally I worked my way through the details, including the transmission block, the engine, and the exhaust. So that's a general approach. As I say, it's a very simple kit, but you do need to have a little bit of thinking about building it before you start, because it doesn't give you a sequential set of steps to build. Although, as we know from Forge World, often while they show you how to build a kit, I'm of the opinion that a lot of the time they don't show you the best sequence in which to build things. Anyway, so instructions, but it's clear enough. Certainly for an experienced modeler, which is I think what this has been aimed at. Let's now get into the a bit about the tank and the cleanup. So there's a couple of things I want to say about cleanup. I'm just going to remove these guns to make it a bit easier to handle. So the casting on this, it was okay. It was all right. There weren't too many mold slips. There were some notable mold seams that needed removing, including one that runs all the way around the center of a track. Now, to give you an idea of the sort of work you've got to do, I left it as it was on the underside. Firstly, to save myself a bit of time, but secondly, just to give you an idea of what the sort of cleanup looked like that you have to deal with if you're wanting to get it all looking perfect. So there's quite a bit of cleanup to do there. There were a number of little casting nicks that needed fixing, a few air bubbles. So here was an air bubble on the track that I had to fill. There's quite a lot to do around back there, as you can see from all that milliput. That was a mold slip there. Took a bit more fixing. You're going to want some wet sanding sticks to do this, something like the Flexifile ones that I've talked about in past videos. Because there is quite a bit of sanding to do, you're going to want a sharp knife. I also use micro chisels as well, and I would recommend those if you're going to work on this sort of model, as I would recommend for any large resin kit. Fairly inexpensive, they cost about £5 each, and they'll make your life a lot easier. The other thing with the cleanup is to do with the material used for this tank, which is this non-VOC resin. Now, that's a fine material, and while I'm no chemist, I don't really know how it's made. I presume, the implication is it's a non-hydrocarbon product, so less environmentally damaging to use. However, from a point of view of modeler, it is harder than most resins you will deal with in scale model building. Certainly harder than Forge World resin, and it's harder to work with as well. There's a certain extra amount of physicality to the cleanup process because the material is harder than common resins used, which they're not like mega soft, but they are fairly soft and quite easy to work with when you get the hang of them. But this stuff is harder, so that's something to bear in mind. Other things, little bits here and there that needed fixing with milliput. There was an air bubble in one of the doors there. I can't remember what was wrong there, but that needed a bit of reconstruction. I mean, that's a bit out of view, but I was trying to build this so it looked as near to perfect as I could do it. And then this bit here was a bit scratchy, so I leveled it up with some milliput as well. I also need to mention about 3D print artifacts from the production of this, the master for this, and there are a few of these here and there. Let me find where they were. There were the remains of some scaffold on the inside of that, the hull behind the track here and here, and there's a few sort of bits around here as well. The inside of these guns, they had quite a lot of scaffold material to clean up. Now, this is now smooth, but you can see in these little dots the, in effect, sort of like the imprint in the cast of what those look like, but I had to actually do quite a bit of cleanup on these to get them smooth. I do think on that there could have been a bit more work done on the master to get it cleaned up better. It would have probably been about a day's work for whoever was doing it, but it would have reduced the amount of cleanup for the customer, and I think that will be good to see in future productions. One other thing on 3D printing, there are a few places where polycount was visible. One of the things that I pointed out with the first Battlecastings kit, the Cutlass Warstrider, is quite a few of the parts, the poly count wasn't very high on the 3D CAD model. You could see that a cylinder had been made up of, say, 20 sides, say. This overall is much better. These looked pretty cylindrical, for example. The barrels of these guns were nice and round. The sponson mount is nice and round. The smoke discharge is nice and round. But there are still a couple of places where the poly count hops through, and you can just see it here on the front. Now, I've done some work just to clean the ridges off, but just on this front road wheel and these inner wheels as well. There's a bit of pitting there as well. I didn't fill it. I think it adds a bit of character to the model. So there is some cleanup to do around that, and a couple of places like these wheels at the front and back, and just this curve of this hull where the poly count just needs to be a bit higher just to get it nice and smooth, in the same way that this is nice and round. Compared to the Cutlass Warstrider, this is a huge step forward on the poly count front of the CAD model, but there's still a bit more that can be improved in future ones, so something to bear in mind there. Do I think that matters in the final model? I don't think it does. Not to me anyway. I think when it's all together, those little issues I pointed out, I don't think the eye focuses on them too much. That's my view. One last bit on quality of casting. The cyclonic guns needed a lot of cleanup, and there was a lot of milliputting to do as well on those. They weren't the best. They weren't terrible. I've seen worse. But if you're wanting to get rid of all your mould lines, there were some mould slips on these. Quite a bit of filling to do there. Okay, so what about how did I actually find the build? Starting with where I began, which was constructing the centre hull. That was fine. It fit together well. A little bit of heat bending to do to take a couple of warps out of some of the panels, but not bad at all. I found that quite straightforward. The outer track units then fit onto that really well, and pretty much as it was built, it sits nice and flat on the table. Sometimes with vehicles like this, you get some wobble and you need to do quite a lot of sanding on the underside to get them to sit flat, but this one was very good out of the box, so that was pretty straightforward to begin with. The next bit was a bit more of a challenge, and that was putting these side armor panels on. As supplied, they didn't fit, and it took me a little bit of time to figure it out, but it wasn't too difficult. And basically the issue was there was too much material here. There's two kind of like notches here and here, and it was just a bit too much material to actually put it on, and I couldn't get it on to start with. So what I did is, using a knife, and particularly a square 2mm chisel, a micro chisel, is I took about just over 1 millimeter of material off the inside of this, and that then allowed them to fit properly. And I just cut now to a photo of that, and you can see here on this photo the red line shows the boundary to the material that I cut away, and once I'd taken that away, then the side armor panel fit properly. I had to do a little bit of heat bending of these to get them to line up and fit. snugly. Wasn't too hard. Just need to be a little bit careful. They're not super thin. They are thin enough that if you heat them up and you push too much in the center when you're trying to align it, you'll bow that in. So you just need to work around it, pushing at the edges and where there's the strength in the material and you can't create a bowed in section. The doors fit fine, as did the commander's cupola hatch. No issues there. They went on fine once the parts have been cleaned up. That was great. Then the engine. There's a couple of ways you could put that together. You could have put the exhaust coming out of the bottom and you could put the exhaust in the center or the middle. I decided to put the exhaust on the top at the edges. So that was so they weren't blocking that vent and they couldn't get knocked either. If you put them at the bottom, they can stick out a bit. And I imagine if it was going up like that, it would crunch its exhaust off. So I did it like that. But you could take your own approach with the engine. I drilled and pinned those in position just for extra strength. Possibly slightly over-engineered, but I like things to stay stuck. Now moving on to just like the general last bits. These sponsor mounts, they just stick in there. There's no pegs or anything, so you have to locate it. There is a slightly flattened bit there, so you can locate it. I chose to put them here. The box model, they've mounted them in a different location. Up here. You could even put them there. So there's a bit of versatility with those built into the kit. Just wherever you're going to put them, just make sure that the guns fit as well when you do that. Then these, you position those manually. There's no tabs or pegs to put them on. The hatch just sits in position. This driver's port, you can put it anywhere here. So again, there's no tabs or pegs, so you need to line it up carefully. With that, if you don't want to put the vision slit on, you could just put the piece of track in place like that if you fancy something different. You also get these hull mounted guns. If you put the vision block right down up front, I want it there, so I like it there, but you can then put these other guns in place if you want. Now, I'm just sort of showing you where they go. I didn't intend to use them on mine. Again, it's a couple more weapon options with building it. I had to do some work on these rails, widening them slightly, so the grooves, to get it to line up with this. So it was a bit of work to do there. I also had to sand the sides down a touch to get it to fit, although I think that's partially because of where I positioned the driver's viewport. Then the final thing on the build is the actual weapons, and for these, there's a bit of assembly to do with these. You put the gun arrays onto this sort of bracket here. Remember to put the eagle skull devices facing outwards. That's where they're designed to go. Then that just left mounting the magnets. So as I say, the kit comes with 10 6x3mm round neodymium magnets. They fit very nicely into the pre-drilled or pre-cast holes. There's not many kits that do it quite as well as this one, so I really quite enjoyed that. Firstly, that the recesses were pre-cast. Secondly, that they got the correct size magnet as well, because some kits I've seen, they've got magnet holes, but the magnets are a bit small. This, they got it right. Same on this. The recesses on the top of the cyclonic gun mounts, so that's these two. I had to use a 6mm drill just to drill out a bit of casting gun within there, because the magnets were sitting about 1mm proud. And if you watch my unboxing video, you may remember that. I needed to do that a little bit of extra work there. My initial thought in my unboxing video that the 3mm depth magnets don't fit here was actually incorrect. The hole just needed cleaning out a bit, and now as you can see, it fits perfectly. So there's the build. Overall, I think if I were to describe the build, it certainly isn't a beginner's kit, I don't think, although it is a simple kit to build. I suppose it depends what sort of quality finish you want as well. If you want everything to be cleaned up, all the defects fixed, then there's a fair amount of work to do. It's a simple-ish kit to build. You get quite a lot of options in how you assemble it, so smoke dispensers, the hull weapons, the vision slip, the exhausts, even the transmission block. You can position that in a few different heights. I put it there, so I think it just looks about the right spot, but you could put it right up against this armor panel or even lower down. So you've got a few choices there as well. Yeah, and the weapon sponsor as well. So there is some variety in how you can assemble it to customize it and make it your own. So in terms of difficulty, it's a resin kit. Resin kits require a certain amount of skill. It's not as easy as a plastic Land Raider, say. It's not as hard as some of the models that Ford would have done. Aside from these side panels, which need that bit of work doing here so they can fit, the actual assembly process is straightforward. Obviously, I've got a lot of experience of building resin kits and kits in general. Yeah, I hope that gives you a feel for the sort of difficulty of this build. Now I'm just going to do some quick size comparisons, and I think sticking with retro themes, here we've got an RTB-01 plastic space marine. This is my old Lieutenant Leipzig from my Space Wolves, going back to 1987 here. So there is a tank with the space marine. It's a pretty big vehicle, isn't it? But it's well scaled against 28mm models, and comparing the marine, the size of the doors, yeah, it looks about a decent size. And the hatches as well. You know, certainly if you had some retro marines or even retro tank crew from the Rogue Trader era, they would probably sit quite nicely on this, or other independently produced sci-fi tank crew at the 28mm scale. I suppose what we really need to do though as well is compare this to a stablemate, and for that we have this handsome tank. So this is the Land Raider Proteus Carrier, or Land Raider Carrier. The kit can be made as a Proteus as well. So this is a release from late October 2022 as part of Games Workshop's new Plastic Heresy range, and a hexagonal tank. So it's a great comparison, and if we put them side by side, we can see that this one is taller overall, but it's got this sort of low slung body. Track units stand quite high compared to this, where the upper deck is much more level with the tracks. They've got about the same ground clearance, believe it or not. Width-wise, it's kind of hard to show you on this camera. They are weapon sponsons excluded. They're about the same. This is slightly wider. With the sponsons are huge on this, so they make it wider. Lengthwise though, if we put them like so, now you'll have to trust me here. I've lined up the rears, and the lang is probably about this part of the lang here from this forward. This section is longer than the Land Raider Carrier or Land Raider Proteus. The lang is of comparable size to the land, but different in a few ways. And certainly if you're looking for something that is about the right size for alternatives to this sort of tank, or if you're into the retro side of the hobby and you're looking for something that's cheaper than, I just forget the kit number now, was it RTB-05, the Land Raider kit, the original one, which are very expensive now. This is worth considering. It's certainly in the style. And talking about that, actually, one thing about this new Land Raider Carrier Proteus kit is you get the weapon sprue, which has all the parts on, so you can make it with dual las cannons or quad las cannons. If it's from a Spartan, it's the same sprue for either the Spartan or the Land Raider. And, well, I thought to myself, what if I took the spare las cannon sets from that, did a little bit of converting, as you can see here, put some magnets on. I wonder how they might look on our friend the lang. Well, I don't know about you, but I actually think that looks rather good. So, you know, if you are in possession or able to get hold of some of these spare las cannons from people's Land Raider Proteus and Carrier kits, there's an interesting thought there to change the feel of this tank a bit and give it somewhat more modest sized sponson weapons if these feel too big and, as I said earlier, have a bit too much goof for you. And there's lots of other weapons as well that you could make alternative sponson mounts with, but for me, I think this is probably how I'm going to set my tank up a lot of the time. Although I do have a soft spot for these. I like the cyclonic gun arrays. So yeah, a little thought there. There we go. I think that's everything I've got to say about the Lang Pattern Assault Tank from Battlecastings. It's a really interesting design. I really like actually the vehicle. It looks really cool. John's done a great job with creating something unique that also pays homage to an old design that's long since out of use. The completer model I've got a lot of affection for. I really do like it. In terms of the overall kit, well, for a resin tank model of this size, it's actually a fairly straightforward build. The fit issues on these side hull parts accepted, although figuring that out isn't as hard as putting right some Forge World and other resin. I mean, Prodos Games, Forge World, whoever does resin tank kits, certainly complex ones like this, come across a lot of issues with fit. So I wouldn't say this is outside of the realm of experience in that sort of range, but it is something that you have to bear in mind if you're going to get this vehicle. The other thing is, if you're looking for a really professional finish on it, there's quite a lot of cleanup to do, something to bear in mind, filling work, etc. And price-wise, well, I think this is $85 US. So it's probably about the same price as a new Land Raider kit from Games Workshop, and it's a bit more expensive than Phobos Land Raider, so it's not the cheapest tank either. I would definitely say it's a model for enthusiasts, probably just based on the price alone. That's just my opinion, and I hope that you found all the thoughts and observations and the very detailed look that we've had at the model. I hope you found that insightful and useful. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up all I've got to say on this. It's been quite a long video. I hope you found it interesting nonetheless, and thanks for bearing with me through to the end. I'd just like to finish up by once again thanking John for sending this review copy through to me. I've enjoyed building it and reviewing it. It's been a good experience. I'll leave a link to his website if you would like to check that out in the description of the video. As always, please do share your own thoughts and observations on this particular model. I'll be interested to hear those in the comment section. But other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.